ghosted by God, when the divine goes silent. Have you ever begged the universe for a sign and got nothing? Not even a flicker, a whisper, a dream, just silence? Stay with me, because by the end of this video, we're going to uncover why, throughout history, when people needed God the most, God seemed to vanish, and more importantly, what that silence actually says about us. In the ancient world, the divine wasn't subtle. God spoke from burning bushes, etched commandments into stone, whispered warnings in dreams, and sent prophets with thunder in their mouths. Take Job, the righteous man from Uz. According to the book of Job, he was faithful, devout, and successful, until God let Satan test him. His wealth, gone, his children, dead, his body, covered in sores. And in that pit of despair, Job cries out, not just in pain, but in confusion. Why me? And God says nothing. For historical context, the book of Job is believed to have been written during or after the Babylonian exile, around the 6th century BCE. The Israelites had been conquered, their temple destroyed, their identity shattered. Silence from God wasn't just a literary device, it was national trauma. As historian Ilana Pardes points out, Job's story mirrors the psychological dislocation of a people abandoned by their deity. That silence wasn't random, it was loaded. Let's fast forward. Between the Old and New Testaments lies a 400-year period known to scholars as the intertestamental period, a time of apparent divine silence. No prophets, no miracles, nothing. Imagine being part of a community that once saw seas parted and manna fall from heaven. And then for generations, nothing. During this period, Jews lived under foreign domination, Persians, Greeks, then Romans. The silence wasn't just spiritual, it was political. Messianic hope simmered under the surface like a held breath. As Dr. Paula Fredrickson notes, this silence amplified messianic expectations, shaping the urgency around figures like Jesus. And here's the psychological kicker. Silence, especially from authority, is not neutral. According to attachment theory, especially the work of John Bowlby, when caregivers go silent, children develop anxiety, protest, and eventually despair. The same dynamics apply to believers and their gods. And under centuries of oppression and silence, that collective anxiety embeds itself into the cultural psyche. Let's talk about Saul, the first king of Israel. In 1 Samuel 28, as war closes in, Saul tries to reach God for guidance, but God won't answer. No dreams, no prophets, no visions. So, Saul does the unthinkable. He consults a forbidden medium, the witch of Endor, to summon the dead prophet Samuel. This isn't just a story about desperation, it's about disconnection. Saul's kingship began with divine approval, but as he disobeyed and spiraled, God's silence became a sentence. The craving for certainty led him to breach every boundary he'd once vowed to uphold. So let me ask you this. When someone who once guided you, be it a mentor, a parent, or even a partner, goes quiet, how do you fill that void? Do you move on, or do you try to resurrect the ghost of who they were? Because Saul did both, and it destroyed him. This is where psychology meets theology. According to Dr. David Rosmarin, a clinical psychologist at Harvard Medical School, spiritual struggles often mirror interpersonal trauma. When God feels absent, believers may experience religious trauma, especially if they were taught that silence means punishment. This idea has deep historical roots. In the Hebrew scriptures, divine silence was often portrayed as a direct consequence of disobedience, seen in the repeated refrain, "And the Lord turned his face away" during Israel's covenant violations. Similarly, in Lamentations, the fall of Jerusalem is interpreted not only as military defeat, but as divine abandonment. In more recent history, 19th century revivalist preachers in America equated unanswered prayer with personal sin or lack of faith, reinforcing this punitive framework. Theologian Jonathan Edwards' sermons, for instance, warned of God's withdrawal as a sign of divine wrath. Over time, this interpretation became embedded in Western Christian consciousness, creating a feedback loop. Silence was feared, guilt was internalized, and trauma was spiritualized. Today, many Christians still struggle under this inherited legacy, believing that divine silence must mean they've failed, fallen, or been forsaken. rather than entertain the possibility that silence might be formative rather than punitive. This echoes the emotional fallout observed in attachment-based wounds. But there's another layer that offers hope. Viktor Frankl, the Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist, argued in Man's Search for Meaning that even in the most brutal silence, humans can create meaning. That meaning doesn't have to come from divine speech. It can come from divine absence. What if the silence isn't rejection, but invitation? Let me tell you something personal. A friend of mine lost his mother last year. He prayed, pleaded, bargained every night for healing. When she passed, he didn't just grieve her. He grieved the silence of his prayers. I didn't just feel abandoned, he told me. I felt ghosted. He isn't alone. In the months that followed, he battled numbness, doubt, and anger. Not just at the loss, but at the absence of response. In therapy, this often manifests as spiritual bypassing, people covering up emotional wounds with religious platitudes, while their inner world screams unanswered questions. But here's what I told him, and what I'll tell you. Sometimes, silence is where you hear yourself. Sometimes the absence of an answer is the start of your own authorship. Think of figures like Martin Luther, who felt abandoned and tormented by God's silence in his early monastic life, but whose personal wrestling led him to spark the Protestant Reformation. Or Sojourner Truth, who after losing everything, her children, her freedom, turned silence into purpose, claiming she heard God not in thunder, but in her conviction to speak for justice. Even in modern times, Nobel Peace Prize winner Malala Yousafzai, silenced by a bullet and a regime, found in that silence the clarity to advocate for millions. In each of these stories, it wasn't the voice of God they heard. It was the echo of a question. What now? And their answers reshaped history. So, no. Maybe God didn't ghost us. Maybe we've just been trained to expect him to answer like a hotline operator, instead of realizing that sometimes silence is sacred. And maybe, just maybe, the divine isn't missing. Maybe it's waiting for us to stop asking and start listening. In relationships, in politics, in belief, ghosting is a test of how we hold uncertainty. History shows us that people crumble under it, but it also shows us that when we listen closely, silence is rarely empty. It echoes. If you like this video about the historical dives into human psychology, please consider subscribing to our channel. It really helps a lot and keeps us able to make this content. We look forward to seeing you on the next video for more on historical psychology.